Hello to all of you. We're going to get started now. I would like to thank you for joining us today for our webinar, STEAM and the Maker Mentality for School-Age Youth. We have a big crowd today, which is very exciting. I'm Janet Nelson, Director of Library Engagement for Demco, and I'll be moderating today's session. Before we get started, I just wanted to go through some housekeeping details, and then I'll introduce our speaker, and she can start today's presentation. On your screens, you should see a chat box on the right-hand side. If you have a question or if you're having any type of technical issue, please feel free to type something there, and we'll do our best to get back to you as quickly as we can. We'll be taking questions at the end of the session, so if something comes up that you'd like clarification on or you want to respond to, you can type it into the chat box, and we'll be compiling all of your thoughts and questions and can address them at the end of the presentation. If we don't get to your question during the session, we'll be sure to get answers and post them with the recorded webcast after the event. There's also specific contact information available for Amy and myself that you should see on the screen as well. After the session, you can feel free to email us directly if you have specific questions that we may be able to help with. We're also using Twitter today, and the hashtag is #DemcoIdeas. You should be able to see that hashtag on the side of your screen in the chat box. We're monitoring that feed as well for questions and comments. Just for fun, while I'm doing introductions, we're going to pop up a poll question on your screen to help us better understand today's audience. And our question is, what types of programs have you offered for school-age youth at your library? STEAM programs, maker activities, both STEAM programs and maker activities, neither? I'm not sure. You can take a minute to answer that, and we'll share the results before we start our program. Now on to introductions. As I mentioned, I'm Janet Nelson, the Director of Library Engagement for Demco, and I'm moderating today's session. At Demco, we're always interested in ways to better serve the needs of our customers, and these webinars have really been a great way for us to connect and provide additional information around important topics for evolving libraries. We're all aware that the library plays a very important role in student learning outcomes. As learning trends change, the library must evolve to support patron needs and continue to engage the community. Rethinking library programs to provide activities that enhance learning and engage patrons, enriches experiences, and deepens meaning, as well as just plain being fun. Today's presentation is going to provide fresh insight into how you can incorporate elements of STEAM into your programs and why that's important. In addition, you've probably been hearing a lot about the maker movement, and we'll take a look at how that relates to STEAM and what types of activities you might consider. I'm pleased to introduce you to Amy Kuster, who is the Youth and Family Program Coordinator at Skokie Public Library. She'll be our speaker and is prepared to provide her observations from her experiences in the library. Amy has recently moved to her position at the Skokie Public Library and was previously a branch children's librarian at the St. Charles City County Library District in Missouri. In her current role, she oversees youth programming and selects fiction for ages 0 to 18. Amy has written about STEAM and making and youth librarianship for the OS blog, School Library Journal, Children in Libraries, and Library Sparks magazine. And she's also presented webinars, online classes, trainings, and conference sessions on these topics at both the state and national level. In addition, she shares library programs and other professional information through her blog, The Show Me Librarian. Before I turn this over to Amy, we just wanted to show the poll results. So it looks like a lot of you have been incorporating both STEAM and maker activities, which is really great. But about a third of you are also in that camp where you haven't done either of those. So looks like some great opportunities here. And our hope is that by the end of the session, you'll have a new understanding of what you can do to incorporate STEAM and maker activities into your programs. So Amy, we're going to put the controls into your capable hands, and you can get started when you're ready.
All right, thank you so much, Janet. That was a very kind introduction. So yes, we're going to go ahead and launch into STEAM and the maker mentality for school-age youth. It's a topic that I personally really love. That's why I started offering especially STEAM programs in my libraries where I've worked. And STEAM has a natural tie-in to the maker mentality as well. So I hope those of you who have done STEAM and or maker programs in the past have found them invigorating and are looking for ways to do more. And for those of you who have not previously, will find it not only doable, but something that's really exciting and engaging to do as well. So webinars can seem a little impersonal. So this is a bigger picture of me. Hello, I'm Amy, as Janet said. I'm currently in Skokie, Illinois, which is just north of Chicago, which is nice for library conferences when they're in Chicago because I can stay at my own apartment. And I've blogged for a couple of years now as the Show Me Librarian, and there I share a lot of program write-ups and recaps, how-tos, including about most of the programs that I'm going to share today in this webinar. So if you want more information, you can absolutely find it online or in my monthly column for Library Spark, which you can get through Demco. So today we're going to hit basically 5 things. The first, we're going to look at STEAM at the library. What is it? How does it tie in? Why should we even be thinking about it? And then once we kind of have a baseline for understanding why and how STEAM are important, we'll look at some examples of school-age STEAM programs. Then we'll kind of do the same thing for maker spaces and the maker mentality. What is it? Why does it belong in a library? Why in youth services? And then look at some activities that tie into those goals. And finally, I'm a firm believer in having as many resources as possible, so you never have to start from square one. So we are going to end before the question and answer session with lots of different resources. And I believe there will also be a handout version of these resources available on the webpage with the archived version of this webinar. So don't feel like you have to feverishly scribble things down. You'll be able to get these resources after the webinar. So let's start with STEAM and the library. A very good place to start is thinking about what is STEAM in the first place. So STEAM is an acronym for Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts, and Math. And when we look at those words kind of without any context, one of those things may seem unlike the others. And that one would probably be art. You know, how does art tie in with sciences? So if we look at the kind of historical educational progression of the STEM to STEAM movement, we can see how arts really does fit in. So in the late 80s, there was a huge national initiative to get American students better equipped to be competitive with their worldwide peers in science and math in particular. And those translated into a law passed under the presidency of Bill Clinton called the Goals 2000 Act. STEM was still a big part of No Child Left Behind. So a lot of emphasis on STEM learning with a focus on American students being competent and competitive in these fields with global peers in a worldwide marketplace. So what started to happen around the early 2000s is a number of STEM leaders, STEM educators, STEM business leaders were starting to say, you know, it's one thing to be competent in math and sciences, but it's another thing to be competitive, and what competitive really means is innovative. And when we're talking about being able to innovate in science, it's knowing what, you know, all of the basic facts, it's knowing those things, but then applying creativity. So the quote I have up here is from Mae Jemison, who was the first African-American woman in space. And in 2002, she gave a TED Talk talking about how arts and sciences are avatars of human creativity. There are two sides of the same coin. And if we want to be successful in a modern technological marketplace, we need to have both of those skills. And that's only continued to be echoed by additional public figures in years hence. So John Maeda was formerly the head of the Rhode Island School of Design, and he has been a huge advocate both in that role and after that role for the necessity of having this arts, creativity, innovative aspect tied in with STEM. And you can see it focuses to him. Let me say, you know, for libraries, a lot of times we think about arts in the concept of arts and crafts. But this is deeper than kind of adding in popsicle sticks and pipe cleaners to make something an art or craft activity. This is about providing open-ended exploration, creativity that allows kids to develop problem solving and recognize that in a lot of cases there is no one right way to do something, which equips them to be really nimble-minded and successful figures later in life, in particular in STEM areas. So that's how we get to STEAM. So why would you want to do STEAM in the library? I think that's totally a legitimate question. So at the most superficial level, because kids really love it. So I recognize that today we're talking about school-age youth, and this picture here is very obviously preschool-age youth. But it just so happens that I was never able to have my camera in a school-age science program that snapped a picture at the exact same time that I did for this preschool one. And I just want you to look at the looks of excitement and awe and surprise and joy on these kids' faces. Carl Sagan would say every child is born a scientist because they're born curious. And that's one of the things that I think we as libraries want to tap into when we're serving kids and their families is how do we tap into that curiosity and help it to grow. So if we're looking very specifically things that you can take to your supervisor or to your board or to potential funders and want to say why you're going to add STEAM in your library, I usually tell people to look to their library mission. So most libraries, first and foremost, literacy is a big part of their mission. And when it comes down to it, literacy is really multifaceted. It's not just being able to read and comprehend and write and comprehend. It's about being able to understand how technology works and to use it productively. So it's digital literacy, how science works, and to apply scientific thought in factual and responsible ways. So that's science literacy. So once we acknowledge that literacy is really incredibly multifaceted, we can see there are so many different pathways we can choose to explore in the library under that umbrella of serving community literacy. Another common goal I see for a lot of libraries is one to support lifelong learners. And kind of de facto, what I think happens at a lot of libraries to say we're focusing on lifelong learners, usually the big programs they're talking about are early literacy initiatives and initiatives for seniors. So the earliest and oldest ends of the lifelong learner spectrum. And those are fantastic programs, great initiatives, they're necessary. I would never argue that they're not. But that's only part of the spectrum of life, the spectrum of ages of community members that we're aiming to serve. So when we're looking at how we can best serve some of those other age ranges, in this case school-age children, we want to look at what things they're encountering in school, in the world, and just their natural curiosity, and take what we know about those things to provide ways to engage them in informal learning in the library. And then last but not least, I think interest is, at least for me, one of the major reasons why I have chosen to prioritize STEAM in a lot of programs here at my current library and in my previous position. Just when it comes down to it, kids are super interested in STEAM in these content areas. They want to know more. They want to get their hands dirty and figure things out and do experiments. And when we're interested in something, when kids are interested in something, that is hugely powerful for motivating them to try new things, to fail and try again, to be kind of intrepid learners, daring learners. And I think ultimately that's something that we want to foster in kids, is this ability to see something in the world that maybe they don't quite understand or they think is a bit off, and figure out how it's working and how they can make it work differently. And if we can motivate them to do those things, I think we're really succeeding as community institutions. So let's talk about some STEAM program examples. I saw Janet shared with me the kind of rundown of what folks who registered for today's webinar said they wanted to get out of the session, and more ideas for STEAM programs and makerspaces activities were high on the list. So I want to make sure we give these a good amount of time. So I'm going to share one program each for each of the 5 STEAM concept areas: science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. So hopefully, especially for those of you who may feel particularly well-versed with the science side, maybe you did Boom Read last year for summer reading and feel like you have science under control, you can see some ideas for ways to expand to some of the other areas in STEAM as well. So let's go ahead and start with science. So like I said, interest and how that motivates kids to be curious learners is something that's very important to me. And so when I put together this slime science program last spring, it was completely in response to a request from one of the kids who had been coming to my school-age science programs for several months. So he came up to me one day in the library and said, "Miss Amy, I really love slugs. Can we do something about slugs?" And I said, "Oh yeah, well I'll write it down and I'll add it to my list of things to think about." But apparently that wasn't good enough, because then he had his mom send me some pictures of him with his pet slugs crawling on his skin, which, I mean, it was very good photography, if a little gross. But yeah, so I was like, yes, we're doing slugs, don't worry. And so we did slime science. And not only was this kid super into it, but you use the word slime, and you're going to have all sorts of kids coming out of the woodwork who just want to get their hands in ooey gooey stuff. So we started with that point of interest, and what I did is I did a little bit of research using some of our books in our nonfiction collections and our databases, and figured out, all right, we're going to do 2 kinds of slime. First, for the kid who spurred the program in the first place, we're going to focus on slugs. So, I gathered some images and a little bit of information, including the fact that the slug slime functions a lot of ways the same way that human snot does, which any of you who've ever been in a room with kids knows that if you have the opportunity to say something like snot, you're going to have instant attention from everybody in the room. So that's a good way to start off a program. So we talked about what function slime serves for slugs and other animals in the animal kingdom. And then we played with some fake slug slime. I was not about to harvest slime from slugs. What I did is I made some fibrous slime. I found some recipes online and fiddled with them a bit. And really for this kind of slime, what you do is buy Metamucil or off-brand Metamucil psyllium fiber, and dissolve it in warm water and heat it over the stove. And as some of the water evaporates, it starts to congeal. And it's super disgusting. Especially if you realize that it kind of looks like Jell-O, but you eat Jell-O, and please don't eat this. So it's kind of gross, but kids loved getting their hands on it and seeing how sometimes it was gloopy, sometimes it was really runny, and seeing how they could use it to kind of lubricate movement across a surface that was hard to move across, how it could actually catch small things and keep them in the slime. So it's a really neat illustration of how slime works, biological slime in the animal world. And then we moved on to a different kind of slime. Some of you may be familiar with oobleck. So there's the Dr. Seuss book, Bartholomew and the Oobleck. And so what we did is we made our own oobleck outside on the library's patio. So to make oobleck, you just need some kind of container. You need water and you need cornstarch. And in the process of mixing the water and cornstarch together, you get this really interesting slime that has a unique consistency. And it is such that when you kind of pour it into, or have some in your hand and just leave your hand with the fingers open and don't move it, it's going to run through your fingers like water. But if you have it in your hand and then start to kind of roll your hands together the same way you would shape Play-Doh into a ball, this slime actually acts like a solid. So you get to introduce kids to this idea of non-Newtonian fluids. So it's things that sometimes act like a liquid, sometimes act like a solid, depending on how much force is being exerted upon it. So, just a little bit of information, not too much, not too daunting. So, even kindergartners in this group are able to take in this topical learning with the added benefit of digging your hands in and playing with the oobleck. So that is an example of a school-age science program. Technology programs are one of my favorites to do, especially as more and more kids seem to be like magnetically pulled toward devices of any kind, whether they're in the library or at home or fishing them out of their parents' tote bag, whatever. So what I like about offering technology programs for school-age kids is that we get to show them ways to use technology not just as a distraction, but as a tool for creation. So one of my favorite things to do is scratch games, and I actually just did this here in Skokie on Tuesday. I had 2 sessions with kids where we created a game using Scratch. For those of you who are not familiar with Scratch, it is a free visual programming language that was created by students at MIT, and their goal was to make learning to code easy for even the youngest of kids, and that's why it's visual. You can see the screen grab from one of my Scratch projects here on the screen, and it's colorful, it's simple. You can kind of see how there are different blocks that you can piece together in different orders to make the code say what you want it to. So when I do these programs, usually they're just an hour, maybe 90 minutes tops. And occasionally there'll be 1 or 2 kids who've used Scratch before in the program, but by and large they haven't used them before. So in my Scratch programs, we're focusing on making a very simple video game. And when kids find out they can make their own games, they're very excited. So I've done things where we've created like maze games. So from scratch, you can build everything from scratch with a blank template. And so kids can draw the outlines of a maze that they're going to have a character try and navigate through in their game. They can draw or import from the stock images or even from online different backgrounds to be settings to their game. And then what they're learning are some simple things like the if-then statements that are so key to programming, so that if I click the up arrow, what is going to happen? What do I want the character to do? Excuse me. So in the course of just an hour, kids who may have never thought about programming before and the step-by-step process that goes into creating a game, and basically the fact that there are rules that dictate how a game works. By the end of that 60 minutes, they have a simple but entirely personally created game that they can then show off to their parents who come to pick them up after the library, or show to their friends, because they can be hosted online if that's something your library chooses to do. So the one tip I would give, I guess it's 2 tips if you want to do this kind of program. I would say, first of all, make sure you test out what type of a game you want to create by creating one yourself. In a Scratch account, they are free. It's web-based, so all you need is a computer with an internet connection, and then you can set up an account for the library. So yeah, test out your game beforehand, because some things can sometimes be finicky. That's just how coding works. But then I like to also have a projector in the room, so I can project an example of the program code onto the wall so everyone can see it and reference it if they need to. Some kids do, some kids don't. All right, engineering. I'm the child of 2 engineers who, they say they're not mad that I became an English major, but engineering had to work in there somehow. So this egg drop program is a perfect one to do in nice weather of summer if you're still looking for some summer program ideas. And really when it comes to engineering programs, when I'm thinking about STEAM, what I want to do is pose a challenge for kids. So it might be, how does a bridge stay up? How would we approach that challenge? In the case of an egg drop program, we have this egg. We know it's going to drop from a high distance. How do we protect it? So in the case of this program, and in a lot of engineering programs, what I do is pose that challenge and then give kids all sorts of materials, lots of recyclables, craft materials, pretty much anything, and let them have some time to build some sort of contraption to be able to test out what they're building. Obviously, not actually test it with a real egg because you don't want to run out of eggs, but to be able to kind of think through this problem of building something that's going to be protective or supportive in the case of a bridge or any other sort of engineering challenge. And then once they have had some time to think about their design, build it, tweak it, then for the egg drop, I invited the local electric company that serves the library to come out, and they brought a bucket truck, and this was a total surprise to the kids, but they ended up dropping the eggs in their contraptions from about 40 feet up in the air, which was super cool. They loved it, and it was funny. For an egg drop, the goal is that eggs don't crack, but I think some of the kids were super excited when there was just tons of egg splatter all over the parking lot. So, it's fun, it's educational, but it's definitely memorable, and that's the kind of experience we're going for, so the kids have a hugely positive impression of STEAM. All right, arts, an arts STEAM program. So this, I think when I've talked about STEAM, sometimes arts is the hardest one for a lot of folks in libraries to wrap their minds around, just because we are so kind of socially ingrained to think of science and art as being two completely separate things. And they don't have to be. They're not in a lot of cases. And in some cases, for instance, with the history of camouflage, the science of camouflage actually came out of a lot of art. So in the 1800s, I think it was. It's been a while since I did the program, so my facts might be a bit off. You're librarians, you can fact check. So it started off with a number of artists who were naturalist artists, so they would go and paint things in nature, and they became really interested in painting animals that seemed to blend into their surroundings just naturally, so camouflage. So in this program, we started talking about that history of camouflage, how it started out, what types of camouflage exist in the animal world. There are 4, in case you're curious. Concealing coloration, disruptive coloration, disguise, and mimicry. So we talked about those things, what those mean, looked at different examples of animals that fit those types of camouflage. Then we transitioned to talk about some modern camouflage and modern human uses of camouflage. So naturally, a lot of kids pipe up like in the Army or in the military, and talking about how what the camouflage has looked like for different recent places of combat has a lot to do with what the landscape of the combat looks like. So, camouflage from World War II or Vietnam, when there was a lot of green and foliage, looks hugely different from camouflage from, say, Desert Storm. So after exploring some of that historical context and how artists and scientists kind of work together to think about keeping people safe in situations in which it would be very helpful for them to be kind of disguised or blended in. Kids got to really the hands-on art aspect of this program where they were creating their own camouflage. So once again, I used a projector in the room, and I projected onto a big wall a picture of a wooded area, a picture of a desert, and a picture of an undersea space, and then gave kids coffee filters and washable markers to try and create their own camouflage patterns that would blend into 1 or 2 or all 3 of those different backdrops. So if you've not done coffee filters with washable markers before, what you do once they color is you spray them with a water mixture, and the colors start to bleed together a little bit. It can get a little bit messy, but it does end up making kind of a neat, almost tie-dyed effect that definitely resembles camoufage in a lot of situations. So that's how we tied in art to talking about something like camouflage. So picking a topic that already has kind of that science-art tie together. And last but not least, for our school-age STEAM program examples, talking about math. This can be another one that I think gives some libraries a bit of pause in thinking about how they're going to offer these programs. One of my favorite things to do is to have an art market. So kids love hands-on creation. They love arts and crafts programs. They like to just see a bunch of supplies in front of them and then just decide how to use them and make whatever they want. So for an art market program, the premise just has a little more structure to it. And it's such that before the program, I create pretend money. So you can see $1 bills here with Elephant and Piggy, $5 with Flora and Ulysses, and 10 with Harry, Ron, and Hermione. So when kids come to an art market program and they come into the program space, they're handed an envelope that has a set amount of pretend money in it, say $25, $30, which seems pretty cool. Like, what's this fake money for? And once they're in the room and looking around, they see the tables are covered with different craft supplies, but each of those supplies has a cost. So in the course of starting out the program, we're talking about how, on the one hand, you can build anything you want. You can create anything that your heart desires, but you only have so much money to spend on supplies. So if you want scissors and glue and crayons, and each of those cost $5, and you only had 30, that only leaves you how much? $15 left to spend on things like paper and pom-poms and sequins and any other things. So we end up talking a little bit about budgeting. So before we just go and start buying things, maybe we're going to go scope out all of the different craft supplies that are available and plan what we most want to use and then spend some money. Maybe we're going to talk to our neighbor and say, hey, I want scissors and you want scissors. Why don't, instead of us both buying scissors, why don't we split the cost? So figuring out kind of some simple math, financial literacy skills like that. And then also the simple arithmetic that happens when kids come up to you, the market owner or cashier or whoever's going to serve that function, and they're counting out their money and the change to make sure that they're getting their money source for their craft supplies. So it's kind of that art component, but it's also got math, just very simply integrated into the framework of the program. And it makes kind of a new twist, a fun twist on your kind of traditional arts and crafts program. So we're going to move on now to talking about maker spaces and the maker mentality. And the reason I do talk so much about the maker mentality is because I personally really strongly believe that making isn't about the space, it's about an attitude. So when we're saying we want to support makers in the library, what we're saying is we want to support spaces or opportunities for people to explore new skills, maybe things that they've always wanted to try or never had the opportunity to do or don't have the equipment to do. And we want to give them opportunities to make something that is meaningful to them. Maybe it's meaningful to them to create a physical something. Maybe it's meaningful to acquire a set of skills or have a certain experience. But those are the things that we're going for with the maker attitude. So how does that fit in the library? On the one hand, it's just a new way of offering the types of programs and services that we've always offered. When we're thinking about giving people opportunities to try new things, that's what book clubs have done for a lot of people for tons of years. They've given people opportunities to approach new types of literature or writing than they may have done on their own. So we're kind of the pathway for that. So making is really the same sort of thing. It's just a different medium than maybe we have offered traditionally. Again, promoting lifelong learning is a huge thing here. Skills are something that you take with you for long periods of time after you've been in the program where you started to acquire them. And in terms of inspiring lifelong learners, equipping people with the skills that they can use throughout their lives to apply to different situations, to create, to explore, that's hugely transformational to a lot of people's lives. Maker activities also can facilitate some great community engagement. There are all sorts of makers in basically every community across the world. There are people who have specialties in certain areas, specific skills. and a lot of people who are interested in sharing those skills and those things that they love. And by having a library that facilitates making, that has this attitude that making is a great thing, something to support, you're bringing in some of those people in the community who may not have seen the library as a place that really tapped into their interests in the past. And then last but not least, there's this idea of the library as the third space. So in people's lives, they have two primary spaces. They have home and work, or in the case of kids, school. And a lot of libraries strive to be the third place, which is the place that they don't have to be, but they elect to be, they choose to be, because of the things that are going on in that space, or that the opportunities that they're offered. And making in the library really allows the library to offer that sort of space. I mean, look at how many community centers and community colleges and local art centers offer classes. And lots of people have been taking classes for years and years and years because it's something they want to do. It engages them intellectually. They learn new things. They meet new people. That's the third space, and that's something the library can absolutely do, a role we can play. So when we're talking about taking the maker attitude into implementation, I like to think of it as a maker toolkit. So when I'm thinking of maker spaces, maker activities, there are a couple of things that are mandatory and a few things that are not. So to me, it's absolutely mandatory that we have activities that are interactive, the things where people can be hands-on. That's really important. I think it's also very important to have a variety of supplies, which that kind of mimics the slide where we talked about engineering and the egg drop STEAM program, having plenty of supplies. So there's a lot of open-ended exploration and application of new skills. So STEAM and Maker are very tied together in terms of philosophy and how we're serving people. And also plenty of time, I think, is vital. When anyone acquires a new skill, it takes time to practice and to hone that skill and to do some trial and error. So offering kids especially who may not have as fine of motor skills as others, or whatever the reason may be, may need that much more time to be able to figure out a process or a skill. I think it's important to give it to them. What's not so important is space. You can have a designated space for your maker activities, but you don't have to. You just happen places that other things usually happen in the library. And another thing that's optional, but I think is really cool, is to have a display space. So if you're going to have opportunities for people to create things in your library, if you have a place where you can display their creations, that's only going to help to enrich this maker attitude that becomes part of your library culture. So as I said, space is optional. There are plenty of libraries that carve out a formal space, whether they've completely renovated the library or repurposed an old office. But I know just as many libraries who have decided to make a mobile makerspace. So the picture you see here is from Karen Jensen, who's a librarian in Texas, teen librarian, but obviously storage is applicable to all ages. And so she didn't have a designated space to do maker activities, but she wanted to make it easy for the youth in her library to do them. So she got a small grant to get a cart where she can put all of the maker materials so that when it's time for a maker activity in the library, they wheel it out. When that activity is done, they can wheel it away. No huge burden on space. So just remember, space is negotiable. So when we're talking, we're going to talk about some maker program examples. I think it's important to recognize that there's a whole spectrum of maker activities. I want to focus today on low tech and medium tech, so things that may need materials that you have on hand, maybe a couple of specialty things you need to order or go out and buy specifically, and minimal to just a little bit of prior experience with the activities. You don't have to be an expert in anything to do those. There are plenty of high-tech maker spaces, not really something I want to get into today. There's plenty of information about that elsewhere online and anywhere in library literature. You can usually find it by searching for the keyword 3D printers. But we're going to focus on low and medium tech for our examples. of maker activities. So I've kind of themed these by a premise. So some maker activities, you can encourage kids to build something. So my favorite and long-standing way to do this is by offering a Lego club, because what is Legos? Playing with Legos if not making. So I've been in libraries where they offer weekly Lego clubs, monthly Lego clubs. Really, all it requires is that you have some space and some bricks, Lego bricks for kids to build with. I personally like to give the program a challenge and say, hey, see if you can build robots, or see if you can build something having to do with ancient Egypt, or whatever it might be, to give kids a little more structure to the program, especially if it happens pretty often. And this is a great example of when having display space can be a huge benefit, because not only do kids have that sense of pride of having their creations on display in the library, but those creations that are on display serve the function of free advertising for other kids who may not have known that you offer these kinds of programs. Another concept for low-tech making is to offer some sort of design challenge. So this example is building marshmallow towers. And really the only supplies you need are mini marshmallows and toothpicks or dried pasta. And the goal is to design something, to build something. So in this case, who can build the biggest tower with toothpicks and mini marshmallows, which may seem easy, but those are not the sturdiest of building materials. So it seems like it would only be, a 5, 6, 7-minute activity actually can take the full 45 minutes or an hour, because kids are trying to tinker with their creations, make it stronger, make it better, and rise to the challenge. Another theme for low-tech making is crafting and creating. So I think there are some great ways to kind of add some aspects to maybe traditional arts and crafts programs that inject them with this maker attitude, where it's, all right, we have these skills, we can acquire these skills and then apply them in creative and personal ways to make something that is important to me. So in terms of card making, we might have lots of different types of paper and art supplies, which we might have at any craft time. But the big difference is that we have also some books on paper crafting, how to make 3D cards, how to make pop-ups, how to make special types of artwork, whatever you have in your collection. But looking at those things and those techniques, so that not only are kids creating something in this space, they're creating something using a new skill that they've just learned about and developed. Let's talk about a couple of medium tech programs. So this theme is Get Wired. So again, medium tech, you're going to have maybe some specialized equipment that you've ordered, in this case, Makey Makeys. So if you're not familiar with Makey Makeys, they're a small circuit board that you can connect to any computer with a USB port by one of the cords. They have a number of other cords with alligator clips on them. And so what you're doing in the course of playing with the Makey Makey is you are connecting the alligator clips from the circuit board onto anything else that is conductive. So things that are metal like paper clips or pencil lead can do it. Even people and other organic things like bananas are conductive. And so you hook up those clips, and what it ends up doing is you hook something up to serve as the up arrow on your keyboard. You hook another clip up to something to serve as the down arrow, as the left and right arrows, the space bar. So what you end up doing is creating your own mini keyboard out of whatever objects you want, so that then kids can play small Makey games where instead of hitting the up arrow, they're tapping on a banana, and like in the case of this program you can see in the picture, they're then playing that causes a specific key on a piano to play. So learning some amount of circuitry and getting to do some really neat games. Again, you would buy the Makey Makeys, and then the programs are available for free on the Makey Makey website. Another great medium tech making program theme is It's Alive, doing things with robotics. So what you see on the screen here is a bristle box, and it requires the head of a toothbrush, a coin battery, a vibrating motor that has the wires coming out of it. We order those from Radio Shack, some double stick tape, and then an open space that will serve as a race course. So when you hook everything up and have the vibrating motor has two cords coming out of it, one that you want to connect to the positive side of the battery, the other to the negative side. That powers the motor and so it vibrates. And what happens with the construction of a bristlebot is then the vibration causes the bot to move. So suddenly you have this tiny little thing that can zoom across the flat space in all sorts of cool ways. And you can kind of tinker with this setup and where things are located on the toothbrush to get it to do move in specific ways, different types of motion. That's a cool one. And the last example of a maker program is repurposing something in a kind of craft setting. So what you see here is repurposing some vinyl records to make them into bowls. I will say you're not going to eat real food out of this because records are not like food grade serving material. But it is a neat thing to be able to have as like an art piece or something to hold, I don't know, like origami cranes or whatever you want to do in a bowl. So you have some old records, you have an oven and some oven-safe bowls. So what you do, you preheat the oven to, I want to say it's like 250, 270 degrees. Google search this project online first because there's a kind of upper limit of temperature that you don't want to go over because of potential chemicals in the record bowl. So you keep it kind of low, put a oven-proof bowl open side down on the cookie sheet, and then place the record on top of that. And as the record heats, it becomes looser and looser, and it starts to bend over the side of the bowl. That's when you take it out, you have oven mitts on, and you kind of shape the record into the shape of a bowl that you want. So that's a maker activity that definitely needs a higher level of supervision, but can be a really fun thing and something that a lot of people aren't going to have any opportunity to do at home. So before we get to questions and answers, I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about some of my favorite go-to resources for STEAM and maker spaces. So I'm always looking for different books in the collection, new things, older things that are on the shelves, and also looking for different articles in library journals. So if I'm looking at go-to books, I'm going to look for things in nonfiction by Janice Van Cleve. She's got lots of different things that look old, they look dated, but science experiments by and large do not get dated. So those are great to go to find different science activities. Same goes for books from Kids Can Press. When it comes to finding books to share different concepts, different STEAM concepts, I'm looking for folks like Gail Gibbons, Steve Jenkins, Melissa Stewart. And this is the shameless plug for my Gaining STEAM column in Library Spark. This has been this past school year and then also next school year. All of those issues have different STEAM activities in them. I'm also a big fan of looking to blogs for STEAM and maker ideas. Lots of librarians across the country share their STEAM and maker programs in a public setting like a blog. So Abby the librarian is a librarian in Indiana. Never Shush is a librarian in Alaska. So Tomorrow is in Michigan. Teen Librarian Toolbox is in Texas. So all over the place. A lot of great ideas from people who are offering step-by-step, and in some cases, step-by-step pictures for how to build some of these things, like the bristlebot, for example. I've also collected a lot of websites where you can get different science program ideas, and in some cases, science supplies. So Steve Spangler Science, for instance, that's one where you can get some great experiment ideas, but also order some equipment if you feel like what you have available in your community isn't going to be sufficient. A couple things on here that I really want to emphasize are Wonderopolis, which is a website, wonderopolis.org, where every day they explore a different wonder, so something in the world with information about it, how it works, why it works the way it does. So that's a great place to find some information on why things work the way they do in the world. And Pinterest is just a great resource. You can go to Pinterest and do a keyword search for pretty much anything. Theme program, library theme, library makerspace, and you're going to find a lot of interesting things. And last but not least, I want to encourage you to think of folks in your community as potential resources for STEAM and maker activities. You might have people in STEM fields or artists in your community who would be happy to come in and talk to kids in a program, introduce a concept or a skill. You might have local businesses who are willing to donate some money or some equipment, local hobby groups who might be willing to, say, bring their telescopes for an astronomy night. And don't forget about local museums, too. Places like Botanic Gardens, Science Centers, Children's Museums. All those places a lot of times have an outreach department or an education department. And even if they can't come to your library, they're usually really helpful and willing to share examples of programs that they do or things that resources you can use online to create your own program. So that's all of the content I have. We have a little bit of my information up here, and I'm going to then go to the last slide while Janet comes back and gives me some of you guys' questions.
Thank you so much, Amy. That's great. We do have several questions here, and I'm going to start out with one that's pretty basic, but kind of important for a lot of our listeners to know about, and that they're inquiring, how often do you hold your school-age science programs?
So that's varied depending which library I was at. So at my last library in Missouri, I was the only children's librarian. I had 2 part-time children's, we call them paraprofessionals, and they primarily did story times and helped with outreach. So I was usually one of the only people doing school-age stuff, and so I tried to offer 1 per month. We would maybe do an extra one during the summer just because more kids were off school. So that's what I aimed for. That was within my capacity. Here at Skokie, we've got a larger team of people, and so sometimes we can have as many as 1 a week. So it's really, I think it's a matter of figuring out what you and your organization have the capacity for, and then if you want to prioritize STEAM or maker activities amongst the slate of programs that you offer.
That's great advice, Amy. So you can see that it really can be a scalable type of situation depending upon your community and your staff. So that's very helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah, and if you're in a school setting, it doesn't have to be a full-on, program, because I know that a lot of school librarians, being able to interact in a informal education way with kids is just part of what you do in the class visit. The other part is they have to find and check out library books. So, it can be as simple as a self-guided activity on one of the tables or a 5 or 10-minute experiment before you get to the rest of the business you have to do.
Great idea. Another question we have is, how important do you think it is to relate all the STEAM activities to library books in your collection?
That is a great question, and I didn't talk about that a huge amount because I didn't have a whole ton of time. I always try to have some sort of book connection in my programs that I share. So I guess I should start by saying 100% of the time I have books on the topic of the program or related topics in the program space, and I encourage kids to check them out if they're still interested at the end of the program. As often as possible, in addition to having those books for checkout, I will book talk a title or share a couple of pages from a nonfiction book to introduce our main concept to try and actually use in an active way in the program some of the materials from the collection.
So that makes a lot of sense, like building those connections to the content, and there's probably a lot of books in your collection that actually support some of these ideas. So they don't have to be specific books that you're pulling out, but ones that really kind of just revolve around that whole idea.
Yeah. Well, and keeping in mind that when I'm doing a program on a science topic, I'm not picking the topic because I already knew a whole lot about it. Like, think about the slime program and the slugs. I didn't know anything about slugs. So I had to go to the collection and look at look up some information, find some pictures. And so those were the books that I shared with kids in the program, the ones that I used to get the background information to be able to offer the program content.
Perfect. So another question that we have that's kind of an interesting question, do you feel that the concepts of STEAM can be used for adult learners?
Oh, absolutely. Everyone is curious. Unfortunately, for some adults, like society has tried to shut that down, or they feel like society has. But like for instance, last night at my library, we had a Stargazer night. We took the library's telescope out onto the Village Green, which is right next to the library. You could do it in a parking lot, whatever. And keep in mind, I'm near Chicago. We've got some serious light pollution. But you know, with a decent telescope, we were able to see Jupiter, and kids were super excited about it. But we had so many adults coming out of the library saying, hey, what are you guys looking at? Can I look? And they were just so into it. Like, people are always interested in learning how things work and discovering new things or things that are new to them. So by all means, like, if you're focusing on programs for youth, do things where you can involve kids with their caregivers. That's got the added benefit that if the caregivers are interested, then they're probably going to continue conversations or activities at home. But yeah, everyone is curious. Otherwise, we'd only have children's museums and not like museums where adults went.
It seems like it could be a good relationship builder too, and some of those multi-generational types of programs that kind of get everyone involved.
Yeah, definitely, and things that can get older kids working in kind of mentorship aspects with younger kids, where, you know, that's doubly inspiring if, you know, a fifth grader can see a high schooler who's super into science. You know, fourth and fifth grade is the time when a lot of kids decide, for whatever reason, that science isn't cool or it's hard, and so they kind of move away from it, and it's largely arbitrary. But if you can have programs where there are older folks engaging them in those activities and they can see how cool and interesting they are, that makes a big difference in the lives of a lot of kids.
Great advice, great advice. Okay, well, we're going to kind of wrap things up here. We just had a couple minutes left. Those questions that we didn't get to, again, we will get a Q&A document together, and that will be out on the website when we get finished. So we're going to wrap things up. We'd like to thank Amy for sharing her insights and ideas around the evolution of STEAM and maker activities in the library, and she gave us a lot of good things to think about. We hope everyone was able to take away a few new good ideas to try out in your library. So there was some great discussion, and we appreciate all of you sharing your time with us. You will be receiving a survey at the end of the webinar to let us know how we did. Please take a few moments to fill this out. We'd love your feedback so that we can make these sessions even better in the future. Feel free to comment on other topics that you'd like more information on, or speakers that you'd like to hear from, so we can consider building some of those things into our future schedules. In the past, we've received some great feedback from our previous webinars, so that's really helped us to focus on the topics that you're most interested in. A recording of this webcast will be available on the Demco Ideas and Inspiration website by tomorrow. That can be accessed through ideas.demco.com, or if you can't remember that site can also be accessed through the demco.com website. So if you missed something or just wanted to review, you can go back and refresh yourself on the presentation, or you can share it with your colleagues. Next week, you'll be receiving an email that will include the resources such as the slides, a list of Amy's resources, and a Q&A log that documents and answers all the questions that came up today. Again, all of those resources will also be archived out on the ideas.demco.com site. So again, thank you for joining us today. Please consider joining us on May 6th at 1 p.m. Central Time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, when Kathy Hagel-Osberg from Libraries Thrive Consulting presents the recipe for leadership success. And watch the Demco website for additional upcoming programs. You can also check out the new Ideas and Inspiration site for webinars that are available on demand to watch at your convenience. We hope that you'll consider joining us for future events. And again, so glad you joined us, and hope that you have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.